Hi, in this series of videos I'm going to put the candidates for the 2019 local government elections in Hamilton on a tier list based around my opinions on who I think has the best policies for this city. To do this, I'm picking some specific issues that face Hamilton City and reading up on the candidates to see how they might respond to them. The first thing I'll look at is how the candidates are likely to protect and promote the city's cultural diversity. With racism and fascism spreading worldwide, I would like to see the candidates explaining how they will work towards ensuring that all are a happy, harmonious and productive members of our community. The second issue is more complex, the economy. I have here a graph of Hamilton City's GDP per capita from 2000 to 2018. As you can see, we were growing wealthier per person before 2007, but then there was a financial crisis and we got poorer from 2007 to 2010. There was a slight recovery up to 2012, and then basically stagnation since then. Hamilton City's per capita economic growth over the last 6 years has been less than the annual economic growth the city achieved in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 7 and 12. Hamilton has not yet recovered from the last recession, and it seems like another one is coming soon. So the second thing I'll be looking for is how will the candidates try to improve the economy of the city. The third issue is the environment, and there were a few things I wanted to focus on, but I decided that the big one is the important one, climate change. How will the candidates work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how will they aim to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change? I will, although, give bonus points if the candidates also have ideas about biodiversity loss, urban ecology and sustainable development. The fourth is the social sphere, and I would like to see ideas on how the candidates will respond to the high levels of deprivation in Hamilton. The most recent data I could find is the New Zealand Index of Multiple Deprivation from the University of Auckland, which shows that around 60% of Hamilton are in the most deprived 40% of New Zealand. Another way of saying this is that Hamilton has 50% more people suffering from high or very high levels of deprivation than a statistically average New Zealand city. So I'll be looking to see what the councillors will do about this. The fifth issue is around the council's finances. Basically, Hamilton City Council has been operating a low rates, high debt financial strategy for the last decade or more. In 2018, Hamilton City had the 24th lowest rates of the 64 territorial authorities in New Zealand, while having the 7th highest debt financing cost per ratepayer in the country. This strategy relies on the council's revenue increasing as a result of the city expanding, property prices increasing, and economic growth. However, over the past decade, this has not been happening. The council's debt-to-revenue ratio has increased steadily from 107% in 2009 and is expected to reach 215-ish% in 2022. At this point, the City Council plans to stop taking on more debt and let increasing revenues lower this ratio to a safer level. However, if the council doesn't stop taking on debt, or revenue doesn't increase as expected, then we may run into trouble with our lenders, as they've told the city not to go over a 250% debt-to-revenue ratio. What I'm looking for from councillors here is how committed they are to transition the city away from debt, what they will look for in improving the council's revenue, and what they are thinking in terms of the financial sustainability of the city council. The last thing I'll look at is something I don't hugely care about, but a lot of people do. That is the representation that people will bring to the council table. Many people have noticed that our council is currently noticeably old, white and male. However, the most overrepresented minority is actually business owners and senior managers, who make up 7 of the 13 representatives. The others are made up of career politicians and former police officers. There is also Mark Bunting, who has spent a long time as a board member of the Well Energy Trust, which is kind of a politician and kind of a business person, so yeah. All our current councillors come from 3 occupations: business people, career politicians and police. If a candidate is from one of these 3 occupational groups, I'll count it as a big negative, but they could make up for it by being from an underrepresented group. I don't intend for this to be a determining factor in the ranking, since I don't think that a person being from an underrepresented group necessarily makes them the best representative, either for the city or for their group. However, if I'm on the cusp of putting someone at a certain rank, I may use this as the deciding factor. One big thing I'm not considering is transport. Transport obviously affects everything that I'm looking at here, in quite a major way actually. So initially, when I was doing this, transport was dominating every other consideration. However, when I tried moving it into its own category, I had to rate cycleways versus footpaths versus buses versus electric cars, and it all became kind of boring and uninformative, so I've decided to leave it out entirely. It's also important to note that how I rank the candidates is my own opinion, and as such is dependent on my own values, etc., so it is subjective. I'll just put up my political compass here instead of going to my biases. If you don't know what you're looking at, this is basically saying I'm as far left as you can go, and I'm most of the way down towards the hippie side of things. Also, I'm only going to be looking at the candidates' online presence. I'm not going to talk to them or ask them questions or consider anything I have seen or heard of them directly, with one exception. I'll just be looking at websites, Facebook, Twitter, etc., as well as news articles that I can find. It's also worth noting that the research for this took place over a couple of weeks, so it may not necessarily be the most up-to-date, even when released. It's always worth doing your own research. Also, I'm bound to have missed things or made mistakes, so again, do your own research. With that done, let's get into it. In this video we are looking at the mayoral candidates, and of course we will be starting at the bottom and working our way up. First up we have James Casson. He is a current councillor, a former police officer, and an old Pākehā guy, so he doesn't do well on diversity. He also doesn't do very well anywhere else. On promoting cultural harmony, he fails because a few years ago he made a statement on Facebook calling for violence against refugees in Europe. He left his job at Immigration NZ over that statement, and he has apologised to Hamilton's Muslim community, but to my mind he has a long way to go to come back from that. He also recently had a bit of a rant on people on Facebook, mourning the dead from the Christchurch mosque shootings earlier this year. So again, I'm not going to give him a good mark on promoting cultural harmony. I don't see James saying much about the economy at all. The closest thing I see to an economic initiative is to reduce red tape for small businesses, which I'm going to give him a slightly negative mark for. Basically, my thinking is that regulation exists for a reason. Something bad happened one time, and someone put in place a rule to stop it happening again. I'm fine with challenging specific regulations because they're no longer fit for purpose. At least we can have a conversation about that. But someone says they're just going to cut regulations for reasons of ideology. They are probably just going to cause those bad things to happen again, like what happened with leaky homes back in the day or Ihu Mātau now. Without specific regulations or reasoning, this logic's going to get a negative mark. On climate change, James Casson is abysmal. He's a climate change denier, or at least he denies that climate change is anything special and probably isn't caused by people. I made a video about his speech in the council chamber on climate change if you want to know more, but I'll warn you it's embarrassing. On deprivation, James talks a lot about crime, which is good because crime disproportionately affects people who suffer from deprivation. However, he is focused on Flagstaff and Rotorua, which are the least deprived areas of our city, so he's basically about protecting the well-off rather than the needy. Finances are the last chance for James to get a positive mark, and he doesn't quite make it. He wants to end frivolous spending, but without defining what frivolous spending is, he just sounds like he thinks he's a magical man who will do what every single councillor over the last 160 years has wanted to do, but better. He also wants the city to live within its means, which I assume means no more debt and a massive cut to council spending in the region of a quarter of current council spending, which would hurt both the economy and the deprived. I should give him a very negative score here, but I suspect that this is all empty rhetoric, and I'm feeling bad about it because they've given him so many negative marks. So I'm only going to give him a slightly negative mark here. Still, with negative marks all around, James earns a solid F overall. Jack Geelan is a musician, a councillor, and a priest of some kind, so he would bring a unique perspective to Hamilton City Council, and that's the nicest thing I'm going to say about him. Jack doesn't have any online campaigning presence I could find, for which I am thankful, so instead I'll tell you a story about the first time I met Jack. It was back in 2009, and I was at an anarchist movie night, sitting in the back row, as is my habit, and this guy walks in and sits next to me, and tells me that there is nothing worse than a young man committing suicide. I think that's a bold conversation starter, but I'll bite, so I say, what about a pregnant woman committing suicide? That led to a 10-minute rant about how I was incredibly wrong, because a man was the head of a family and contained the spirit of the family, so the family would continue so long as he was alive, regardless of how many other family members died. It didn't even matter if he had a family. Every man contains the spirit of a potential family, and that is the most important thing. So yeah, Jack did not create a good impression, and I've tried to avoid him ever since. The main news story about him is from ages ago, when he made a habit of going to the funerals of children that had committed suicide, and trying to get some counselling work by telling their parents that their other children were at risk of suicide now. So Jack hasn't put anything online for me to grade him against. However, he's a joke, and I'm giving him a rank in the F tier anyway. Andrew King has been the mayor for the past 3 years, and is running for re-election. He is a businessman selling used cars and financing loans. In the cultural rating, Andrew doesn't say much online. However, when he became mayor, he changed the opening prayers of council meetings. Before Andrew, they rotated between the different religions of Hamilton. But after his election, they are Anglican only, so I'm marking him down a bit. In terms of economic development, he has an idea. He wants to expand the airport to allow larger aircraft to land here. I don't think this is a really good idea. Hamilton doesn't have much of a competitive advantage compared to Auckland Airport. You save an hour and a half driving if you are heading south from Auckland, which isn't exactly a lot to attract airlines to land at Hamilton. So we end up competing on price. And getting budget airlines to come to Hamilton, which, they tend to go out of business or shut down routes pretty often, or at least this is what happened in the past when we tried this. And even back then, the Waikato Expressway hadn't been completed, so we saved 2 hours of driving rather than an hour and a half. So yeah, not keen on this as an economic stimulus. On the environment rating, it's interesting. His website has a section called Climate Change and the Environment, but it doesn't mention climate change at all. Having said that, he does have a few good ideas for sustainability. However, he did also unsign the local government leader's climate change declaration, and he did recently object to a report that stated that capitalism and colonialism were making it difficult to deal with sustainability issues. He called it political derogatory and undermining the basis of democracy. So yeah, he isn't getting good marks on the environment. In terms of reducing deprivation, the only thing I can see that could impact deprivation is that he wants cheaper housing by cutting back on regulation, in particular letting houses be built taller and closer together. However, I'm not sure how much of the cost savings will go to the tenants and how much will go to property developers and landlords, while the tenants will get the full impact of the reduction in quality. So I don't think this will reduce deprivation by much, but will probably make the already wealthy better off. In terms of finances, he says that he will collect the revenue required, and he demonstrated this by supporting an almost 10% rates increase last year. So it seems like he's trying to put Hamilton on a more sensible financial footing, and that pragmatic financial stance is enough to lift the current mayor into the D tier of candidates. Angela O'Leary is a businesswoman, so she brings one underrepresented group onto council at least. In terms of promoting cultural diversity and harmony, I couldn't find anything Angela said specifically, so moving on. Economic development, also nothing. Although I will say that she is very active on social media, so I may easily be missing things. On climate change, Angela has something to say. Her plan is to create a youth climate change advisory group, which is better than nothing, but I'm not actually that keen on it. Climate change isn't a youth issue. There should be a youth advisory group about issues affecting youth, and a climate change advisory group to advise about climate change. I just don't see any reason why you'd shut out elderly expertise or affected communities from advising on climate change policy. However, she also says that the City Council has never had a climate change policy, which isn't true. They had a climate change action plan from 2003 to 2010. It needed to be renewed with new targets in 2010, but the council at that time chose not to. Also worth mentioning that Angela was first elected to council in 2007, so she was a part of the council that made that decision. I made a submission to council in 2012 asking him to introduce a new action plan. She was in the room, so I assume she was listening, so she should know that this existed. I'm assuming that she's just forgotten that the council once took climate change seriously. Also worth noting that her Facebook page is full of climate change deniers, or at least they all come out when she mentions climate change. However, she's not a denier. She thinks that climate change is happening and we should do something about it. So ultimately, I'm going to give her a neutral position on this. The advisory group is good but flawed, but I'm mostly just annoyed that she's forgotten about the former action plan. You can actually Google it. It's still on the council's website. Just Google Hamilton City Council Climate Change Action Plan. Be the first thing there. Well, probably the first thing there. On deprivation, Angela again has little to say. She wants progress for everyone, but no specifics other than that statement. But still, I'll give her a positive rating for that. In terms of finances, she wants rate rises to be tied to the CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index, which presumably approximates the inflation rate for council services, meaning that she is not going to be increasing the income from rates in real terms. Therefore, under her leadership, we will be keeping a low rates financial strategy and probably keep borrowing money to maintain our services. Angela does say she won't cut core or essential services, but doesn't specify what these are. Presumably she will cut non-core and non-essential services and therefore borrow less than we have been over the past decade. However, I would like to know what non-core and non-essential services she intends to cut. Until then, I'm inclined to say that Angela's financial plan is likely to put us even deeper into debt and possibly put us over the 250% limit that our lenders have set, so I'm rating it very poorly. I actually can't find much information about Mike West. At the time of writing, all I can find is a Facebook page created for the 2018 by-election, which hasn't been updated since February of that year. That page is actually a bit light on details as well. Mike is a bit of a one-note kind of guy. However, I did find that he owns an engineering business if you're interested in the diversity aspect of things. Mike's one note is that the council rates increases are too high. He wants to reduce them by cutting spending. He did propose specific things to cut back in 2018, things like the Central Library, Clauden's Event Centre, FMG Stadium and Seddon Park. So I'll actually give him a pity point since he is at least proposing specifics, although I'm far from endorsing these cuts. Other than that, he did say no to supporting a living wage back in 2018, so I'll give him a negative mark for deprivation, and on the rest he hasn't had anything to say. I'm kind of tempted to give him negative marks across the board because he seems to be adverse to anything that costs money. However, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and a low C-tier ranking. Lisa Lewis is under 40 and describes herself as a self-employed businesswoman, but I'm going to ignore that because her business was as a sex worker. She is the only one of the mayoral candidates that doesn't come from the usual three occupations, and with her age and gender, she is the clear winner in bringing diversity to council. But let's look at her policies and vision, which are actually important. In the cultural sphere, she makes some strong and clear statements. She will work hard for all the diverse cultures of Hamilton. She will not tolerate discrimination and will welcome people into our city with respect and promote trust. She doesn't offer any specific proposal on how she will work to end discrimination, but her heart is in the right place. In terms of economics, her idea is to improve Hamilton's economy by promoting tourism, which is fine. It's a sector of the economy where Hamilton is well placed to succeed, but again, she has no specifics beyond promoting and showcasing Hamilton's attractions. On climate change, Lisa has written more than any other candidate, but most of it is a long quote from the Ministry of Environment, or the Ministry for the Environment. But beyond that, she thinks that the Council has a responsibility to support communities to adapt to climate change, and stresses the need for significant action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Again, no specifics, but she's signalling she will support action on climate change. In terms of reducing deprivation, she has a few policies that will reduce it. She wants more space in homeless shelters, she wants more CCTV cameras in high-crime zones, which, if data-driven, will largely benefit disadvantaged communities, and hopefully will act as a deterrent to reduce crime in a non-punitive way. She also wants to build more houses to increase housing affordability, so that will have a positive impact on reducing levels of deprivation in Hamilton, although I really would have liked to have seen more details on her plan to build more houses. In terms of finances, I find Lisa a little bit incoherent. She mentions the city's debt and she wants to play it down, but she also wants to limit rate rises. Her solution is to cut wasteful spending and defer major projects. The only thing I specifically read her discuss postponing are public artworks, but at the same time she wants to increase the pace of footpath repair and wants to build an indoor skate park in Hamilton. So unless she ends up shuffling a lot of money around and cutting a huge chunk of council services and projects, this isn't really feasible. So ultimately I'm rating Lisa slightly negatively for finances, since she basically seems to be wanting to make non-specific budget cuts to solve the city's financial problems. Still, Lisa is in the top half of mayoral candidates and, in my opinion, getting the B tier all to herself. Louise Hutt is a young female CEO, so in terms of identity, I think those basically cancel each other out, and she'll still end up being better than most other mayoral candidates in terms of bringing more diversity to the council. Unfortunately, her online presence is a bit light on policy, so there isn't a lot I can really dig into in terms of rating her. In cultural terms, she does want a lot more diversity around the council table, which is a good suggestion, although I personally doubt 12 councillors in a mayor could effectively be representative of a city of 170,000 people. Of course, it's also something that she wants, but will rely on voters to actually accomplish, so this only counts as a small positive, more indicative of her worldview than an actual policy. On economics, she wants to support the tech industry. No specifics beyond wanting to support that sector, but it is an industry which we can expect to grow over the next few decades. Hamilton also has a competitive advantage thanks to the University of Waikato, and it's an easy export industry since the digital exports don't require transportation costs. So it's a good choice of sector to focus limited resources on, and it's also less fickle than tourism, which is the other sector that people seem to be choosing to focus on. Climate change is Louise's big issue, and her policies are brief but contain enough to put her above the other mayoral candidates in this regard. She specifically wants to create a carbon zero society, with a focus on the biggest polluters, agriculture and transport. She will also re-sign the local government leaders' climate change declaration that the vast majority of other councils have signed. In particular, she mentions the need to upgrade our stormwater system, which is great because this is the first part of infrastructure that will be impacted by climate change in Hamilton. Hamilton in particular is expected to have fewer rainy days, but more rain overall, meaning that the stormwater system will be dealing with a lot more water at once than it currently does. So she gets a big plus for dealing with climate change. Deprivation is again a bit weak. She wants more collaboration between charities, social enterprises and council, and wants to address housing insecurity and affordability, and has written on Facebook about increasing the city's social housing portfolio. So it's all positive. I just would have liked to see more specifics on what she expects this collaboration to look like. On finances, Louise doesn't say anything about either the debt or rates, so I have nothing to go on here. Still, overall, it's enough to make Louise a solid choice for an A-tier candidate. Paula came second in the last mayoral election by only a few votes. She was formerly a long-serving regional council and Waikato Regional Council chairperson. Under the cultural heading, Paula has some good ideas. She wants to reinstate community sector advisory forums, which would give groups more opportunity to feed into council decision-making, And she also wants to increase the funding of the community development and communication teams so council staff can get out into the community. She also wants more community-led developments like the planned Rotatuna Community Hub, so that's all very good. Economically, Paula's focus seems to be supporting small and medium enterprises to grow, as well as attracting businesses to Hamilton from elsewhere in the country. She also wants to support tourism through enhancing both our attractions and events, as well as improving the infrastructure in terms of hotels and so on. She mentions that she also wants to try and convince government departments to relocate to Hamilton. Overall, this is a good broad-based proposal for economic growth in Hamilton and seems likely to lead to an increase in wealth for Hamilton. Climate change is a little bit weaker for Paula. Her website wants to discuss a response to climate change and ensure appropriate action is taken, which is fine, but she doesn't propose anything specific or convey a sense of urgency. Paula was, however, the councillor that proposed the amendment to declare a climate emergency, so she deserves credit for that. And she does also point out that Hamilton only has a fifth of the ecologically important green space that we need to maintain biological diversity, so that is also a positive. There is little on Paula's website regarding deprivation. She is keen on more affordable inner-city high-density housing. She also wants to support charities, including by providing them funding. Regarding finances, Paula is a bit disappointing. She wants to keep rates under control, which I am interpreting as small increases going forward, which means it'll be a long time before the City Council can really get its debt under control. However, Paula wants to increase the Council's use of public-private partnerships so that the Council doesn't have to bear the full cost of projects going forward. But the downside of this is that the Council and ratepayers lose control of the project in proportion to the private funding, and the benefits are also shared between the public and private sector, at least as a general rule. She also claims to want to cut spending but doesn't propose anything in particular to cut, which always frustrates me. This is a realistic financial strategy, but not exactly my first choice. Public-private partnerships are effectively selling off our democracy to those with the wealth to invest in a project. Still, despite her poor showing on finances, Paula earns her position in the A tier. So this is it for the mayoral candidates. As you can see, they've covered the range. They're pretty concentrated down the bottom, but there are at least a couple of good candidates in there, although none made an S tier ranking. In choosing between the top two candidates, they're different, but they're both good. They both bring a lot to the council, and they'll bring a lot to the mayoral role. So yeah, it's going to be a tough choice, and I'll leave that all up to you. Bye.